Everywhere you look right now, people are calling the end of the dollar. You've said before that
What's
when
new?
everyone starts using that language, it usually means they're misunderstanding the system. So where does that misunderstanding start?
Well, I think part of it, the misunderstanding is and for good reason, we've been taught if something goes up, that's good, and if something goes down, that's bad, right? It just kind of makes sense from just a rational standpoint. But the issue that I've tried to explain with the dollar is that as the DXY falls, that means that the dollar is becoming more entrenched in the world because the way that that happens is that means more dollar liquidity is being put into the system. But the way dollar liquidity gets put into the system is by the creation of more US dollar credit. So when you see the DXY falling, that's actually the world becoming more dollarized.
Mm.
It's when the dollar DXY goes up versus foreign currencies and it starts causing all kinds of problems. And people are forced to use something other than the dollar because they just can't get it. And things start to break and they're forced to find alternatives that de-dollarization happens. And this is part of the reason why I've always argued that we are going to transition from one system to another. And at some point, the dollar will lose its status in the world. But I think that that process will see the dollar go higher before it eventually falls and fails, rather than going lower. In other words, I don't think we're going to see the dollar go into the 80s, 70s, 60s, and then it just kind of withers away. I think what's more likely is we'll see a bunch of chaos, a bunch of volatility, during which the dollar will go higher, and then what comes next perhaps will be a new system.
So what you're saying is that when the dollar goes higher, then that creates problems for other countries, and so then they're forced to then try to find something other than the dollar. When it goes down, that means the dollar's actually expanding. There's getting more dollars compared to other currencies. But I might say, before we started recording, we had a short conversation about something else. So what I would say is maybe that was the case. And so if the dollar's going up, then people are forced to find another currency because the dollar's going up. But there could be other reasons that people might be forced to find another currency other than the dollar going up. For example, if it continues to be weaponized against them. And then thereby,
Yeah,
either one, they were kicked out, so they're forced to find something, whether the dollar goes up or down. Or number two, they don't want to be kicked out or have it weaponized against them, so they're forced to find something else, whether it goes up or down.
that's exactly right. And you could argue that when the United States weaponizes the dollar, and there's various forms and formats via which they can do this, you could argue that they are the ones creating the de-dollarization or the situation which would cause de-dollarization when they do that. Now, in the shorter term, what I would say is they apply enough pressure to put people kind of on edge and make them acquiesce to certain things. And then when they acquiesce, then they release that pressure. They provide the dollars afterwards, right? So the U.S. doesn't want to lose the dollar as the global reserve currency and as the underlying kind of base layer of the whole system. But they might lose it at some point anyway. But again, I think if and when that ever happens, it will be a violent occurrence, which sees the dollar go higher initially rather than kind of a slow and steady drip, to the downside.
But wouldn't you say that it's already been a slow and steady drip to the downside? So number one, I think if we look historically, when the dollar took over from the pound sterling, that was a 30 to 40-year process. And the pound sterling is still, I think, the third most used currency today. So that was a gradual process, and it's still there today. It's not dead. I mean, technically not dead. And then you might argue that China and Russia have been de-dollarizing since 2013 openly. It looks like the dollars being used in settlement have gone down from about 60% to, I don't know, 50%, ish. So maybe it is sort of like this gradual process.
Well, I think what you're describing is the system just continuing to operate as it is expected to. I don't think the dollar is anywhere near to be dying right now.
Right.
So is the system expanding? Are other avenues being searched for and tried? Of course. And I think that will continue. But to actually go to a wholesale change, I think, is a complete other animal. Now, listen, maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe the dollar will just slide off into irrelevance as other options rise. I don't think that that's possible. I'm always open to the possibility of being proven wrong, but so far nobody's been able to show me how that would happen, and I haven't seen any real evidence of it, at least on a permanent basis in the markets. But, I think what the other thing I would say is, I think the other problem that many people kind of have with this whole discussion is the whole US dollar DXY doesn't really mean anything because that's just a relative position against other currencies. It doesn't change the fact that it's lost an incredible amount of purchasing power over the last several decades. And I would say that's absolutely true. My thesis has never been that the dollar was going to maintain purchasing power. My thesis has always been that the dollar was the king of the fiats and it wasn't going away anytime soon. And I don't think fiat currency was designed to hold purchasing power. So for people to say that as the dollar has lost purchasing power, it's failing, well, maybe failing in an absolute sense, but that's what it was designed to do.
Right.
The other thing I would say is, since, the DXY is at like 97 right now, which is high 90s, which is up probably 10% from when I first started talking about this in 2018. And this is despite all the stimulus, despite all the bailouts, despite all the money printing. And if you think about it, all of the major actions that have been taken against the dollar over the last several decades has always been to weaken it. The Plaza Accord was to artificially weaken the dollar. QE 1, 2, and 3 were done to weaken the dollar. Yield curve control is done to weaken the dollar. So if something is so horrible and it's going to die this awful death on its own, why does the U.S. Fed have to keep coming in and weakening it? So I think, and then finally, I would say that all other fiat currencies suffer from the same issues that the U.S. dollar does.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that Bitcoin won't do well or gold or anything else, but as far as fiat currencies go, I think the dollar's pretty entrenched.
Does it mean that they have to weaken the dollar, or does it mean that they need liquidity and the dollar weakening is the outcome or the what happens when they get the liquidity they need, right? I mean,
well, I think it's both. You can argue is which came first, the chicken or the egg, but liquidity is provided by weakening the dollar.
Right. But
Again,
in the Plaza Accords, the trade deficits were too far out of whack, and so they needed to make the dollar weaker so they could make trade settle better. But in 2008 with QE, like the banks needed money. And so the dollar getting weaker was a byproduct of them giving the banks the liquidity, right? So the demand reason is different.
Yeah. Sure. Under those two scenarios, the main reason was different. But I would also say that the reason manufacturing was low and the trade deficit was bad in the 1980s was because the dollar was so strong.
Right.
And the way that you kind of reverse that flow is you weaken the dollar.
Right.
And you could argue that's what Trump is trying to do again now, right? He would like a weaker dollar because he wants to get the trade balance back in, somewhat a reasonable order.
Hey, if you like this short conversation I just had, you're going to love the full-length conversation. Don't miss it. You can go ahead and click right over here, and I'll see you over there.